Welcome to another episode of Scriptures. I am sitting in for Pastor Jim Bradford today, and we're going to continue through our series of Psalm for Our Souls, and we are in episode 6. And today I'm grateful to be able to bring to you Psalm 78, which is a psalm about remembering our history. It's a psalm really of warning, but also a psalm of encouragement because of God's mercy in our lives. And so we're going to start right here with verse 1. It says, "My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth." When we're reading Scripture and we see something said 2 times in a row, so you see "hear my teaching" times 2, because right here it says, "Listen to the words of my mouth." So we probably should take heed the next things that are going to come out of the psalmist's mouth. And so when we read through this, we really want to get a good understanding of what this psalm is all about and what we can learn from and apply to our lives. In verse 2, it says, "I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things, things from of old, things we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us." So this word parable right here is a very important word. We're going to see it again here in Matthew chapter 13, verse 35. This is Jesus talking. It says, "So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet." Jesus says, "I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world." So this parable, as you know, we've seen Jesus speak in several different parables throughout his life. This parable is a little bit different in that it's less about just stories and more about the history. And we'll see here in a moment, he will talk about the history of the Israelites. And why parables, though? Well, parables, I mean, it's storytelling at its finest, right? So, number one, a parable, it's going to arrest our attention. So, when we hear stories, there's things that happen, connections in our brain that really just allow us to gain a better understanding and knowledge. Number two, it excites thought. And number three, it remains in our memory. So, it's very important to the psalmist here to give a parable or a story to kind of help people really understand things better. And this is kind of a history lesson that we're going to read. And some would only see it that way. But through the eyes of faith, the history of Israel is actually our history. The story of Israel is our story. It's this cycle of remembering what the Lord has done for us, then forgetting them, right? And then them sinning, and then again remembering. And it's really, again, this is a warning about the history of the Israelites and what kind of happened when they would remember and then they would forget, and they would remember and they would forget. It's a cycle of this remembering. So we move forward to verse 4. It says, "We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done." So this is all about passing things down to the next generation. You know, you may have had things handed down from generation to generation in your family. I know something for me, my great-grandmother had an amazing sauce recipe, and I have Italian roots, and when you hear the word sauce in Italy, that just means a spaghetti sauce. And so she taught her daughter, and her daughter taught my mom, and my mom taught me how to do this sauce. And it goes even beyond my great-grandmother. But you know, it's a special thing to me. It may not be special to anybody else, but it's a special thing to me. And you may have stories from generations in your own family that have been passed down. Maybe stories of courage or maybe negative things, but nonetheless, things that you can learn from and take and then teach to the next generations. In Psalm, in verses 5 and 6, it says, "He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach." I want you to focus on these things I underlined. To teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. So there's 3 things that we want to focus on right here. He commanded our ancestors to teach their children. So it's not just to be left for them to pick up religious knowledge, but instead they are to be taught. They're to understand these teaching. And then I underlined know, because know is very important here. When we say in our day and age, when I know this person, that doesn't really hold a whole lot of power. I know him. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. But when we see the word know in this context right here, it's actually the Hebrew word for know is yada, which is to have an intimate relationship. So that they would put their trust, their obedience, in the intimate relationship with the law, and they would put their trust and obedience in the Lord fully. So it's good to understand that word know is not just a passing statement. It's a very important thing to understand, know. And thirdly, they would in turn feel the responsibility to teach their children. So there was this understanding that once you teach, and then once that person knows, which means they have an intimate relationship with the law and trust in the Lord, that they in turn through their life would teach the generation after them. And then it becomes this cycle of teaching. And so how can we learn from that as we grow in the Lord? What does that do for us? Yes, it gives us an amazing relationship with God, but then through that relationship, we're able to teach the generations after us. Very important to remember. Go on into verse 7 and 8. It says, then they would put their trust in God again and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. They would not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and religious generation whose hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not faithful to him. So again, ensuring that the next generation would not make the same mistakes as the ones that came before. Because as we're going to read in a moment, it's this forgetting. It's this forgetting about what the Lord has done for them that causes them to slip back into a sinful life. And so it's good for us to think about these things. And as we remember the generations before us, what is it that we can learn from them? What is it that we can learn even from the Israelites as well? So as we get through here, now really verse 9 through 64 are about three things here, as you see. They're about God's marvelous doings. They're about Israel's forgetting, sometimes remembering, but as we'll see, it's mostly forgetting. And then God's wrath. And one thing I didn't put back in there again, it kind of goes with God's marvelous doings, but God's mercy. So we're going to read through, I'm not going to read through the entire psalm here, but we're going to read through some of this. Is kind of where he gets into this parable, this storytelling of the history of the Israelites. It says, the men of Ephraim, though armed with bows, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant and refused to live by his law. They forgot what he had done, the wonders he had shown them. So they forgot what he had done. Again, it's this forgetting. It's not remembering the stories of the past where God had just come through in so many ways for them. And so they're sinning against the Lord in his ways. And so it goes on to say these are the things that the Lord had done before them. It says he did miracles in the sight of their ancestors in the land of Egypt, in the region of Zoan. He divided the sea and led them through. He made the water stand up like a wall. He guided them with the cloud by day and with light from the fire all night. He split the rocks in the wilderness and gave them water as abundant as the seas. He brought streams out of a rocky crag and made water flow down like rivers. Really just a list of the amazing things, the abundant of things that God had done for the Israelites. And then we see right here, but they continue to sin against him. Regardless of all the things the Lord had done and shown himself, they continued to sin against him, rebelling in the wilderness against the Most High. So now this is kind of a list of ways that they rebelled. They willfully put God to the test by demanding the food they crave. They spoke against God. They said, can God really spread a table in the wilderness? True, he struck the rock and water gushed out. Streams flowed abundantly. And that's kind of where they sort of remember here, right? Like they kind of remember that God did do something, but quickly but can he also give us bread? Can he supply meat for his people? And this is just a really interesting point right now, because now the Lord, he's going to give them what they ask for. And I don't know if you've ever tested the Lord in your life, but it's a dangerous thing to do at times, because the Lord isn't afraid to give you what you want, even if he's tried to get you to go another way. You see that when the Lord heard them, he was furious. His fire broke out against Jacob, and his wrath rose against Israel, for they did not believe in God. So his wrath is there. However, yet he gave a command to the skies above and opened the doors of the heavens. And here manna rains down and meat rains down. But ultimately, he gives them what they want, but then he takes it away, and then he puts to death the sturdiest of them all. We won't read through that entire part. And all of this happens. All of this forgetting, kind of remembering, and God showing his faithfulness, giving them what they want, and ultimately leading to this line right here that is really just a sad line. And it says, in spite of all this, they kept on sinning. Sinning. Another word for that right now for our purposes is forgetting. Right? Sinning equals forgetting. They forgot, and so their forgetting led them to a place of sinning again. And I want to encourage you to find yourself in the history of the Israelites. Remember, Israel's history is our history. Israel's story is our story. How many wondrous things has the Lord done for you in your life? And in spite of all of those things, you keep on sinning. You keep on doing the things that you know he's asked you to turn away from. It's really our story when we read through this. But what does the Lord want to do through you today? If you're faithful and if you're up to the task, there are things he wants to do through you. We're going to skip ahead to verse 65. Here it says, Then the Lord awoke as from sleep, as a warrior wakes from the stupor of wine. He beat back his enemies. He put them to everlasting shame. Then he rejected the tents of Joseph, and he did not choose the tribe of Ephraim. This is really important for us to understand. He did not choose Joseph, and he did not choose the tribe of Ephraim because of the way that they kept forgetting and they kept sinning against the Lord and his law and his commands. And then we read on, but he chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. He built his sanctuary like the heights, like the earth that he established forever. He chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheep pens. From tending the sheep, he brought him to be the shepherd of his people, Jacob, of Israel, his inheritance. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands, he led them. So again, we see the wondrous workings of God, the mercy of God, and this time through the use of a man by the name of David. And by establishing the sanctuary on Mount Zion where the Ark of the Covenant would be, it was just really another showing of God's great mercy on his people, because he loves his people. And through David's shepherding and through a man after God's own heart, he would use David to bring his people back to him. So I want you to think today about God's mercy on your life. Where has he shown you just amazing grace, even when you didn't deserve it? I know I can look back on my life and just look at times where his mercy, his grace on my life were far beyond what I could have ever imagined or even been deserving of. So just think back on those things. And then as you guys sit in groups, I want you to discuss 4 things today. I want you to discuss why faithfulness to the Lord is important. And not only for your own life, because it is important for us, but why is it also important for the lives of the generations that follow? Discuss what you can learn from Israel's history and other past generations, good and bad. discuss how you can teach the generations that come after you. What are some ways that you can be a part of that, whether that's through mentoring or just teaching your children, whatever that may be. How can you be proactive in that? And then talk about God's mercy and faithfulness in your life. Like we talked about just a moment ago. What are some things in your past where you've just seen the hand of God in your life and He's had great mercy on you? I hope you have great discussion in your groups tonight.